Rudy is an isekai protagonist, and just like all the other isekai protagonists, well, except for Subaru, he's quite overpowered. Thanks to a lore reason which I won't explain here, he is an incredibly powerful caster and magic user. Of course, he also learned and trained extensively to become a better mage, and he also became a somewhat competent swordsman. However, unlike many other isekai protagonists, he's not content with all he has. He does not simply enjoy an easy life. In fact, his new life often resembles an old Greek tragedy. Eris, after ghosting him after his first time, left him a broken mess, with the words from her farewell letter about them not being equals completely misunderstood. Over the past years when the group was traveling home, Eris was more or less the weakest link in the group, with Rudy being the strongest caster, and Rudeus excelling as the strongest melee fighter. Rudy was also the more level-headed and strategically thinking character, whereas Eris was impulsive and temperamental. Additionally, remember how much fear Eris and Rudeus had when meeting Orsted, while Rudy could talk to him as if he was chatting about Raid Shadow Legends? We knew that this is just because Orsted was cursed to be feared and hated by every living being in the world, and Rudy, being from another world, wasn't affected. Eris didn't know that. She saw Rudy as mentally stronger than Rudeus, and far better than herself, and therefore she wanted to train to match his level. Rudy, however, was still a lonely and broken man in his heart, which is why even in his dream sequences, he still saw himself as his old, overweight self. Rudy, after reading this letter, felt that this letter was nothing but a severe rejection. Eris seemed to want nothing to do with him, leading Rudy to blame himself and fall into depression. And prior to this point, nothing in his new world affected him as deeply as being ghosted by Eris did. It was a massive emotional blow for him. And then came Sarah, or rather she didn't, but I'm getting ahead of myself here. The anime hinted at this, but Sarah gradually fell in love with Rudy over the months they traveled together. Eating, drinking, and fighting. Sarah didn't particularly like nobles, and Rudy's Grey Rat family was responsible for protecting the land from monsters, a duty they neglected. So initially, Sarah held a lot of resentment towards Rudy. She perceived him to be just another arrogant noble who wanted to go on adventures, while others didn't have the luxury of choosing to be one, but actually had no other choice but to fight for their livelihoods. But after seeing Rudy's humility and witnessing his fighting abilities, as well as being saved by him eventually, they grew closer. Rudy didn't even notice this given his lack of self-confidence after Eris's departure. And when his big night came and he didn't straighten his spear, Sarah, from Rudy's perspective, insulted him, calling him seemingly pathetic after he failed to straighten his spear, so of course he was completely shattered. Later, after being taken care of by the most unlikely person we could imagine, Soldat Heckler, and after leaving the red light district still somewhat drunk, he spoke about how Sarah was unattractive anyway in order to make himself feel better. But of course, Sarah had heard all of it and slapped Rudy. The humiliation had simply been too much. If not for Heckler's quick intervention, Rudy might have taken his own life right there. He was utterly broken at this point. And this entire storyline is so heartbreaking because it reflects real-life situations. Being transported by a magical catastrophe to a demon continent, fighting monsters or slaying dragons might not resonate with our everyday experiences, because we don't experience these types of problems. At least I hope so. However, getting rejected by someone you care for deeply is something many of us can relate to. Mushoku Tensei capitalizes on these painful real-world fears, making us empathize with Rudy. We can, at the very least, imagine ourselves in his shoes facing the same struggles he did. Being thrust not only into a fantasy world but also into a world of psychological horror is when the emotional turmoil hits close to home. This is what sets Mushoku Tensei apart from other isekai anime. That's why, in my opinion, it hits harder emotionally.